Hi, it's Ruth Hobbs here for Property Sisters. We've got the lovely Lisa Brown here from Pebble Properties, who's our kind of guru now at assisted living. Now, assisted living, is something that we weren't really talking about a couple of years ago, but Lisa and I were just discussing it just then, and it's just one of those strategies that is COVID proof, recession proof, everything proof, and it's something that's really I get asked the question all the time, about assisted living, even though I'm not doing it. How do I get into it? And this is really what this call is about today, just a bite-sized chunk of, how do I get into assisted living? So I think over to you, Lisa, if you could just tell us, what your thoughts are.
I suppose the first thing I'd say is we generally refer to it as supported living rather than assisted living. There are lots of terms and they're used interchangeably. So some people refer to it as extra care schemes and some people refer to it as assisted living and supported living. Generally, assisted living and extra care schemes refer to support schemes for people with older people who sort of need increasing support. So that's generally the difference. And generally, supported living is schemes for people anywhere within the lifespan who have support needs that aren't related to aging. They were, due to many other issues. So your question was how to get started, Ruth. And it's really tricky. So it's about connections. It's about making connections with people really with supported living. You need to find out if you're a property investor and you think, I like the idea of supported living, how do I get into this space? You need to find out, you need to get into your community and you need to understand what the needs are in your community. You need to understand what's missing, what kind of organizations need property at the moment. And that's really hard to do because in my experience, and I'm speaking to providers all day, every day with the stuff I'm doing with supported living gateway, the providers fall into two camps. They either fall into a camp of providers who are approached all the time by property developers going, I'll develop something for you. And they get to the point that they stonewall them because they're approached by property developers and investors who are offering them inappropriate properties or don't understand it or are looking at it from a very, very mercenary point of view. I've heard I can get this much money for a property as they're starting conversation with the providers. So they kind of just stop blanking them and they get their admin staff to sort of hold people off. Or the other end of the spectrum are the providers who are desperate for property and have no idea how to speak to property investors, don't know how to make those connections, have a business or a charity or an organization that they want to grow. They really have a need for more property, but they just can't make those connections. They can't get people to understand supported living. Lots of property investors are scared of supported living, aren't they? They're concerned about the tenants that they may have. They may think that they're going to be ultimately responsible for looking after some vulnerable tenants and feel that they don't have the skill set to do that. Or they've heard horror stories. There are horror stories everywhere about all different things, aren't there? So I think,
I think the first points you make are really, really invaluable. And that is, I think the first point is, if you want to get into this area, you really need to understand your area. First of all, you need to understand what's going on in where your gold mine is or wherever you're going to do this. And secondly, you need to understand your product. You can't be, you've got all the experience of being a senior nurse, Lisa, haven't you? And all that wealth of knowledge behind you. And that's one of the reasons you're so successful as well, is because you really do understand all the different groups and how that all interchanges. It's no good if you're coming in cold. You can't just walk up to a provider and say, oh, I'll do some properties. You need to have, because they're just going to blank you. So that's really, really good advice.
Yeah, I think you can have those conversations if they're really at that point where they're looking purely for property and they know what they're looking for, then you can. But I think it's making those connections by, like I said, finding out, getting involved in the community, volunteering, speaking to people who are in the community, friends who may be social workers, health professionals, making those connections and finding out what's needed. But I have found that, like I said, lots of them, it is very hard to make those connections. I speak to a lot of property investors who've been trying for ages to make those connections and haven't had any luck with it. Yeah. And that was why we set Gateway up, was to make it easier for people, really, so that they can, we do those connections on people's behalf, because it is very, very time consuming to get set up.
So, and we'll put all the links to Gateway underneath, and
thank you.
Mastermind, and all Lisa's information will go underneath. The other side, once you've got your property and you've developed those relationships, you have to find your finance and how is raising finance.
It is a challenge. The mortgage companies are still behind in that they still see this as risky, and they're still very concerned. The tenants are classed as vulnerable tenants, which for them means there's a reputational risk if they had to do a fire sale and get rid of the property very quickly. Now, I kind of feel that actually that's in breach of Disability Discrimination Act, because actually, why is a young man with autism more vulnerable than a single mum with 3 children? Actually, you're discriminating on their disability rather than anything else. However, that's a battle I'll fight at another time. But there is products out there. They are limited, they are slightly more expensive, but when you look at the overall package, it generally works out as a balance. But you will struggle if you're, say, a first-time landlord, you've got no landlord experience. There's a lot of other factors that have to be, so if you think about when you're normally looking at a mortgage product, any of the things that would restrict your mortgage, say you've got an issue with a lease, or there's, I can't think now, all the different things that would make you go, okay, I need to have a specialist lender. You can't have that on top of supported living. You really have to have a very straightforward lending profile yourself or your business, and a very straightforward property to then add supported living onto the top, because you're funneling down and making it more and more specific. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose once you've sorted out your financial model, you really need to, I suppose, you niche yourself within this sector as well. Whether it's flats, and I've watched previous videos where you say only go up to 9, for example, or really know your product in terms of gardens and single living, single units, not HMOs, that kind of thing. So
it's really interesting. So actually, the more conversations I've been having with providers since I did that, it changes all the time. I've got providers now who want blocks of 20, 25 flats, so actually that has changed, and that the CQC guidance around sort of 6 to 12 as a maximum, but other providers are looking for bigger numbers of flats. And there are also providers who are looking for HMOs as well, smaller HMOs, not necessarily this massive. I think people's perception of a supported living property is a 20-bed HMO, an ex-care home that's in a really rural area, beautiful grounds, but actually that's not necessarily what most providers want. Most providers want somewhere where people can be integrated in the community and not be too isolated. And if you're putting people with one specific support need into a huge block like that, that kind of isolates people from the community a little bit.
So I suppose there's different models required. It comes back to your location and knowing your area, knowing what providers want in that area. And how does the lease work with them? Do they take it over a 5 or 10 year period, or?
So there's a whole range of different organisations in supported living. You've got anything from small care companies to charities to housing associations who'll be taking the lease on your property, and they'll take a lease on your property from anything from 2 to 25 years. Typically, I would say on average we're looking at 3 to 5 years is the probably average that most providers are comfortable with. But a lot of the bigger providers will offer you longer leases. That again depends on your finance and your exit, and sometimes you need to tweak the lease numbers to reflect what the mortgage company are happy with as well.
So they take the whole building and manage it, or?
Yeah, they take the whole building, they lease the whole, so if it's a small block of flats, they'll lease the whole block. So that's what's so appealing about it for a lot of property investors, because it comes a really hands-off model. So you're not having to do any management, you're not responsible for voids. A lot of the property day-to-day wear and tear and the stuff that takes our time as a landlord is actually taken away from you. So that's managed on your behalf by the provider, and you still just get your rent every month, so it can work.
What's
really
your long-term goal for your property portfolio? Is it to have lots and lots of these units, or to stop at a certain point, or?
I don't want to have thousands of properties. That's nowhere I want to be. I just want to be enough that I can live comfortably. That's all I'm looking to do. And at the moment, I'm putting so much energy into Gateway that I'm not growing my own portfolio at all, really. So, but yeah, it's I don't have huge, great, ambitious goals. I just want enough to be able to live on and to leave money for my kids to be able to be comfortable, really.
I saw you on site on Facebook on one of with your pink hat on, which was lovely. Can you tell us a bit more about that property?
Yeah, so that's an old social club in Plymouth. It's an area of big regeneration in the city, and we're converting it to 13 one-bed flats. We're just in the final stages of planning, so we've still not got planning fully agreed at the moment. But the plan is that will be for people with quite complex mental health support needs, sort of stepping down from acute services. And there's a real shortage of that in the area. So a lot of people are kind of stuck in hospitals, unable to move on because there's nowhere appropriate for them to go. So the 13 flats, one will be a staff base hub office with a bit of communal space, and the other 12 will be for 12 individuals to live in. So people have their own space, their own front door, their own home, but they can access support when they need to. And then there'll be shared gardens with sort of pockets around that people can interact in if they want to, or have their own space. So
yeah, that's fantastic. Well, it was only just a short interview today. I want to say thank you ever so much, Lisa. It's just really fascinating, to interview you again. I'm going to drop all the links for Lisa down below. There is so much to talk about on this specific subject. So if you want to find out more details, go over to Lisa's Facebook, her Instagram, and she's got a fantastic YouTube channel as well, where she covers loads and loads of topics. So it's well worth subscribing to that channel too. So thanks a lot, Lisa.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Ruth. Bye.